I'll start the YouTube stream and then let you know.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening if you're watching us on YouTube. This petition evening is live on YouTube, so if any of you in the audience here are not supposed to be here tonight, please stay behind the cameras so you aren't seen. I'm Councillor Jonathan Bianco. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council, and I'm also the Cabinet Member for Property, Highways and Transport. And it's the Highways bit that causes me to be here tonight. On my left is Steve Clark, Democratic Service Officer, who will make sure the Council is run properly and notes taken appropriately and stop me if I do something wrong. And on my right is David Knowles, Head of Transport and Town Centre Projects, who is the font of all knowledge on these matters. I should start also by saying that we are not expecting a fire alarm this evening. So if one does go off, please follow the officers to the fire exits and they will see you safely out of the building. Can I also ask you, if you have mobiles or tablets, to please at least switch them to silent. And that takes me to the first agenda item, which is Harmondsworth Road petition requesting the introduction of a resident parking permit scheme. Is Miss Michael here? That's you. Now, the other quirk that I will just explain is that anyone wishing to speak, I may listen to. The petitioners must come up here and use the microphone, as indeed anyone else who's going to speak will have to come up here and use the microphone so that people watching us on YouTube can hear what is being said. Because if you speak from back there or speak without the microphone turned on, you won't be heard. So that is why we're doing that. And last but not least, let me say to you that as chairman of this petition evening, I have the final say on anything that is decided tonight, and unfortunately, if you disagree with me, there is no court of appeal. However, many of these will pass through for further work to be done, so in many cases there won't be a final decision tonight. However, we'll do what we can to help. What I would say also to the speaker is you have up to 5 minutes to speak. Start when you're ready, and do so by pressing the button on the middle of your screen, on the middle of your speaker microphone stand, which will light up, and then you'll see the red light, and you can go. You don't have to speak for 5 minutes, but you may. Thank you.
I'm from Harmondsworth Road, and on behalf of my neighbours, everyone is at work at the moment. But we're struggling for parking. We have to walk like 10-15 minutes to park. And we got children, and me, my neighbor, we got children with a special need. It's very, very difficult. If you come especially after 8 o'clock, there is no way parking. And most of the parking is being taken by people that work at Heathrow, or some people that they travel to Heathrow, which is inconvenient for them to take U3 and 350, which is outside our house. So we ask him kindly if you can suggest to do something to sort it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We don't have a councillor here for this ward, do we? No. Right. Mr. Knowles, am I right in thinking that is this an isolated spot, or are we close to existing? What would be the sensible way forward here in terms of?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bianco. It's not far from WD7, to use the vernacular, which is the nearest parking management scheme, which is across the road. And as the petitioners have highlighted, there is the odd-numbered sides and the even-numbered sides, opposite sides of quite a wide section of road. Harmondsworth Road itself is quite wide, and there are slip roads which are also part of Harmondsworth Road. Some years ago, residents on the other side of the road from where you live petitioned and asked to be included in a parking management scheme. Long story short, they were consulted upon and the scheme was implemented. And the wisdom of the councillors at the time was not to extend it further to the other side of the road. because there was no perceived demand at that point. Things change. I understand what you're saying about your proximity to Heathrow, and I can imagine you probably do get a lot of people who park. But if there's unregulated parking in that sort of area, it's not too surprising. I would respectfully suggest that we take forward your request and consider extending the parking management scheme, and we'll do that in fairly short order, I think.
I don't have any reason to disagree with that. My only query really is with regard to the streets behind, like Great Benty and the others there, which I know well. I've walked this patch quite a few times, because the obvious thing is always the knock-on effect. You sort one road out, everybody there is, great, it's marvellous, and the people in the next road who didn't have a problem, or maybe they did have a problem, suddenly you go, bloody hell, look what's happened. So, excuse my French. So, I think, Mr. Knowles, if we can, let's widen the exercise a bit, if they aren't already in some sort of scheme.
What I might briefly say is that's where obviously the expertise and the knowledge of local ward councils is helpful.
Yes.
Because we help, they can hopefully guide us and steer us towards that very point that you're making, because they obviously know the area. But I think offline we'll have that discussion.
Good. I think that makes good sense, and we've whizzed through that. I take it there's nobody in the audience that relates to this? No. Good. Otherwise, I'd ask you if you wanted to say something.
Just you're moving all recommendations up.
Well, I was just coming to that bit, but yes, no, you're absolutely right. Meet the petition. Yes, I'm moving all three recommendations. So I thank you very much for coming. The council will move this forward, and we'll look at what can be done. I should issue one small warning, which is the money for these schemes comes from Transport for London, aka the Mayor of London. And he's not always as forthcoming with his cash as he might imply, or indeed he might be. That isn't to say it won't happen. It doesn't even mean it might not happen reasonably quickly, but I just issue that as a slight warning. If there is delay down the road, that's more than likely that's the reason. But let's get on with the survey. Let's see what the neighbouring residents think and the councillors. I should just add one further word of warning. I seem to be whizzing these out right at the end. But the council has a policy of not implementing parking schemes without the consent of the local people who are going to be affected, i.e. the people in the roads concerned. So we will undertake a survey at some point and say, hey, look, this is the scheme, do you want it? And as long as the people down there go, yes, please, then we'll install it. But if we get significant kickback with lots of people saying, no, actually we don't, we'd rather have what we've got, then we won't install. So it's not something we impose, it's something we provide reactively to residents' requests and residents. We want residents on board with this if we're going to install it. Otherwise, thank you, and hopefully we can move forward. Unfortunately, we will have to sit and...
we don't have to.
Don't we?
No, not for this one. Now we've started the meeting. It's only to start the original.
Oh, I always thought the time frames were crucial.
Just for the very start of the meeting. So happy.
Splendid. Well, in that case, if someone turns on at 7:15 on their YouTube channel and find they've missed it, well, they can watch it in the edited highlights that follow. In that case, the second petition is in respect of Cedars Drive. Is Mr. Webster present? Mr. Webster, would you like to come up here? You've heard all the preamble I've given you already, or gave your predecessor already, and so hopefully you're clued up to how it works. You have 5 minutes from when you're ready to start.
Hi, I'm a resident of Cedars Drive, and our petition, we've put in quite a few petitions over the past 10 plus years for a parking scheme down Cedars Drive. All the roads associated to Cedars have all got parking schemes on it, so like you mentioned earlier, we're the last road in the area. I've been a resident for about 3 years, and what I've noticed since moving in is that the A10 bus, which goes straight to Heathrow from around the corner, gets all the holiday makers parking down our street, going on holiday for 2 weeks, taking up the parking spaces. It's quite a narrow street. It goes round in a U shape. So there is limited parking, and we've had situations where emergency services can't get down the road because of parking. Previously, schemes have been blocked because of the closes that branch off Cedars, which is actually Bishops. What we tend to say there is they're single car roads, so they shouldn't really be consulted on it, because if anyone wants to park down it, it blocks the whole street. So we've got 43 houses on our street, and we've had 33 sign up to the request we put in. The minimum we would like is a single yellow for 2 hours off no parking. In an ideal scenario, we would prefer permit parking to correspond with Vine Lane and the Rise and other areas close by.
Thank you. Brief and short and to the point. Thank you. What I would say, obviously, is that I had a question, actually, of Mr. Knowles first. There's reference in here, in the report, to unadopted roads. Are you aware of anything that is unadopted? I wondered if the bit at the end, which was our housing estate, but that would have been adopted, wouldn't it?
Without checking, unfortunately don't have the highways adoption plan in front of me, but it would be probably the very end. What you tend to find sometimes is that if there are sort of off-street parking areas, but a concrete parking that's like lay-bys, I don't know whether there are any in your road, I can't recall any, those are sometimes private. But I think most of the road is adopted highway.
Okay. Well, Mr. Webster, I don't have any issue. I think it makes good sense to include it. You're right on the edge of an existing scheme. It would be a very simple thing to include your road, and whether we include the closest, well, I think that will be down to officers to go and look and see whether it's practicable to do so or not. Clearly, if it's impossible to park and still pass down those closes, then that would answer itself, and maybe I was going to say maybe we paint a yellow line down there, but arguably there would be little point. You're going to say something.
Bennett's going to come in a moment.
Well, I'm going to invite him.
But I'll just briefly say, I think that that the petitioners have clearly given it thought, and you've not acknowledged the fact that we've consulted a number of times in the past, and for various reasons. I suppose everybody agrees there's a problem, but not everybody likes the medicine, the way I usually put it. So people don't say, well, I don't necessarily want a scheme that imposed upon me, but I've got a problem. The sort that you talked about where people park and go and use the bus to the airport, unfortunately, it's not uncommon, that sort of thing. But you have asked for a single yellow line. The only thing I would warn people, because they think, well, that's a great idea, and it usually is, but obviously it does mean that for 2 hours in the day, residents can't park on that single yellow line. I mean, you do appreciate that. Now, in some cases, that isn't a problem. It depends on the individuals on the road concerned. Sometimes we find that there's a road where people are working shift work and they don't like it. Sometimes people just becomes part of their pattern of life, and they think it's a great way to get rid of all that holiday parkers. So it's a sound suggestion, but subject to what your council got to say, then we can take forward.
I was going to pull him in next. Councillor Bennett, would you care to join your petitioner? You'll have to speak from there, I'm afraid, for the reasons I've already outlined. No, you can stay. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. There were supposed to be two chairs there. No. Pull the chair up and Councillor Bennett can manage a chair on his own, I'm sure.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. I think it kind of very neatly sets out in the petition exactly what this is for. Where Cedars Drive is at the end of, I think it was termed the Hillingdon Hill Parking Management Scheme. Every other road's got it. Displacement is the main reason why there are issues, but it's a very narrow road. There's lots of what I would say inconsiderate parking, where people park very close on opposite sides of the road, and you've got to meander to get through. There are the Heathrow holiday makers off on the A10. There's people using the retail outlets at the top of Hillingdon Hill. There's users of the RAF sports ground when they're there for events. So there's quite a lot of different factors. I guess the good thing about doing something here is there's not really much further displacement impact. So because it's kind of cul-de-sac, the next sort of area that isn't managed is Court Drive, which is a fair bit of a walk further up Vine Lane, and is also a very wide road with ample parking on either side. I think with whatever sort of consultation might follow, I think if ideally the residents would like that parking management scheme extended, as Rob said, but I think they are acknowledging the previous petitions and pushback in 2009, 2013, and the single yellow line 2 hours a day, very similar to Blossom Way, might be a more palatable option and would at least solve part of the issues that they have, albeit not fully. Residents might be more minded to vote in favour of that. But I think if we can try and keep options open possible, if that can be done through, so for example, if the closes don't want something but Cedars Drive do, then it can still happen on Cedars Drive if the majority are in favour. There is a southern section of Cedars Drive that you'll see on the map, which really is more akin to Buckingham Grove. Cedars Drive and its closes are sort of 30s built housing, and then it was almost extended, I would imagine, in the sort of late 70s, judging by the architecture. That part of Cedars Drive, there may be some pushback there because it's a very different residential setup, but again, that shouldn't hinder the remainder of the road from getting what they would like. I think they've all been incredibly patient over the last sort of 14 years whilst this problem has got worse and worse. So anything we can do would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I mean, I hear everything you say, and it all sounds perfectly sensible. Now, I should find myself because my phone isn't on silent, but it is now. The issue of whether you put a yellow line down or a parking management scheme down, that will undoubtedly deter the holiday parker. It will deter the long-term parker, the all-day parker. It may not deter the person using the sports ground or nipping to the retail warehouse park because of the hours that they operate. I don't know off the top of my head what hours the existing scheme operates, but generally they operate, as you know, for a couple of hours in the morning or in the afternoon or around midday or something like that. Other schemes work longer. There isn't an issue in terms of the hours, but obviously if the route that we go is to include Cedars Drive into the existing scheme, then we'll need to follow the same hours of operation. If we put a yellow line down, then obviously we would have an alternative, a different opportunity. The obvious thing, obviously, with a res park scheme is that the residents can park, assuming they buy a permit, which unfortunately we now sell for £75 for the first car. But obviously, if we put a yellow line down, then everybody is at risk during that period. So those are the choices. You touched on the fact, and we discussed it earlier, that previous attempts have failed. And I repeat what I said to the lady who was on before, which is that the council won't impose these schemes on people. They want to take them along with the ride. So if the response is no, we don't want it, then we won't proceed. I'm pleased to hear what you said about the numbers who signed your petition in relation to the numbers in the road. And if that is carried through, then there shouldn't be any problem here. So I think the obvious recourse here is to follow the issues, to follow the recommendations that are supplied here. That gives Mr. Knowles the opportunity to look into what will work best and perhaps consult with you further on that. And at some point we will obviously then consult with the streets involved. And what we do about the closes, well, I mean, that will depend on the physics as much as anything else as to how they work. Does that make sense? Are you happy with that? Are you happy with that? Yep. Splendid. In that case, those recommendations are agreed. Well, I will ask, is I don't know, if Sonali is a man or a woman, do you know?
I don't know. Good question.
Is that you, sir? No. No, beg your pardon. Is it? Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you care to leave, you can stay all evening. I'm always happy to have an audience, but if you want to go, feel free. Good evening again. This is the item 6, the agenda item relating to a request for a pedestrian crossing in Watford Road northward. It would appear that neither the petitioner nor any of the residents, nor indeed the councillors relating, have appeared tonight. So without them, I can't obviously hear what the petitioner may or may not have to say. On this basis, I'm going to amend the recommendation slightly. Obviously, I haven't met with the petitioners and I haven't heard what they've had to say. I'm not going to ask officers to undertake a 24-hour 7 speed and traffic survey, but I will undertake to have a further conversation with the local councillors as and when I next meet them to discuss this matter with them further. It is an area I know particularly well as I live very close to this point. I am aware of the existing zebra crossing that is not well used, and so I am sceptical, but will obviously willing to have that conversation, and will not make my mind up until I have heard from them. Let me welcome people back on YouTube in case they're here, and do this officially. Mrs. Vance, it's good to have you here. You have up to 5 minutes. Don't feel obliged to speak that long. You have up to 5 minutes. I should add that on my right is David Knowles, Head of Transport, and on my left is Steve Clark, Democratic Service Officer, who will ensure that the minutes are taken and all the procedures are correctly done, and I don't do anything I shouldn't do. However, you have 5 minutes to speak. You don't have to speak that long, and I will, well, in light of the fact that there aren't 20 other people to ask in case they want to say anything, I may ask you questions. I will undoubtedly bring Mr. Knowles in, and so that is that. When you're ready, press the button on your, that's it, give it a good press.
Okay, so Edgar Road is quite a small road. If you look at the actual layout of the road, one part of the road has basically very, very small front gardens, so the ability to have off-street parking is very, very limited down the road. We did previously have a petition when the people, I think in Providence and Whitethorn, had asked about permit parking, and we had also said could we be brought in with that. I think their issue had been obviously where the school was in Providence Road, which has now moved. That obviously caused a bit of a parking issue for Providence Road and onto Edgar Road as well. At the other end, you've got John Guest that caused a bit of a parking issue. But I know originally it came back and said that John Guest was making more arrangements for off-street parking. So since the council brought in the off-street permit parking in Column Avenue, that's obviously caused a bit of an issue all round that small area. Now, I can fully understand why the people in Column Avenue decided that would be a good thing. It benefited them because of people parking their cars there and going up to the station. We also have similar amounts of that happens down Edgar Road, that people park their cars there and then go to the station. We were having a bit of an issue when we had contractors building Crossrail, where some contractors would park down our road because you'd see them, putting on their overalls and going off to work. So it is a very narrow road. It's a very small road. There isn't enough parking spaces as there is for everybody's cars. So people do rely on being able to park on Providence Road, where there aren't as many houses because of the school frontage. So, and there is at the far end of Providence Road, there's off-street parking. Same as Whitethorn. Most of the houses there have got curbs where they can park. Really, if it's brought in the parking permits down down Whitethorn and Providence, the people in Edgar Road are going to have nowhere to park. So, if you bring in the permit for Edgar Road, it gives us still the benefit that we would be able to park still in Providence. We'll pay for our parking permits, but we can then still pay to still park in Providence and Column Avenue and the other adjoining roads. So I think that's why people are looking at, although nobody wants to have to pay to park outside their own house, but without the permit parking, I don't know where people will be able to park. That's it, really.
Well, thank you. That was clearly set out. I wanted to pick up a couple of points, and I will bring Mr. Knowles in shortly. And you actually touched on one of them, but I just thought it was worth reiterating. When one puts in a permit parking scheme, it is the position, size, shape of the bays is quite strictly governed. They can't be near drop curbs, or they've got to be so much distance from a drop curb. It must be at least X meters long in size, and so on and so forth. And the net result is, in a typical road, a reduction in the amount of parking that is available. I can't give you a percentage because it will change from road to road, but the net result is generally a reduction, because when there's no parking management scheme in at all, and one can park freely, let's call it that, you can get more cars in. Because you will park nearer to a drop curb, you will park nearer to other things, you'll squeeze a car in where a residence permit won't allow. So I wanted to make that point. You have already expressed the fact that, as it is, people with properties in Edgar Road are already parking in Whitethorn and Providence, and Mr. Knowles will mention in a minute or two where we are with that proposal. The other thing I was just going to mention, and I don't know if it has any relevance at all, is that we have recently amended our off-street parking arrangements so far as front garden parking. And I can see, looking at the pictures here, that quite a number of the houses have so little in front of them that you didn't matter what you did, you couldn't get a car on it. But there may be other houses there that hadn't previously thought about it and wouldn't qualify, but now could. In other words, where they could ask for a drop curb to be put in, and then they could park their car on the front of the house. I'm not saying it's definitely the case, but I just wanted to mention it because we have changed the policy to make that easier, and particularly in respect, and particularly we were keen to do it as more people, I wouldn't say more and more, but more people are moving towards electric vehicles where they need to charge, and this is one of the issues, one of the ways of helping people do that, because obviously one isn't allowed to park your car next to the curb and trail a cable across the pavement because of the obvious trip hazards that would follow. That having said, can I bring in Mr. Knowles for a minute, and then we'll give you another chance to speak further.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I mean, you mentioned Column Avenue, and you're quite right. There is a scheme there. It's called Y1. It operates Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and it seems to be quite successful. There have been a number of petitions over the years asking for various things, and you mentioned that we've got Whitethorn and Providence who have been consulted again fairly recently, and I think without sort of jumping the gun too much, I think it's fair to say that a report is shortly going to be presented for Councillor Bianco to consider, which looks like it might consider the possibility of putting a scheme in there. I would just mention that Edgar...
Sorry to interrupt you there. If you put a scheme in, will it be an extension to Y1, or will it be a Y2 or something?
I think it probably would be an extension to Y1, most likely. What I would say is, if you look in the body report, and I realise you haven't necessarily got a copy of it before you, but you may have had the chance to see it. When we have tried in the past to secure support in Edgar Road, there's actually been things like a petition actually against it, a strongly worded petition against it. And I suspect that may in part be the fact that actually Councillor Bianco very helpfully alluded to the fact that when you put a scheme in, a formal scheme, it basically tightens up the ability. And in fact, I just quote from one of them. It says, "We request that Hillingdon Council withdraw their current proposal of permanent parking restrictions in Edgar Road, and basically we, the residents of Edgar Road, will look after it ourselves." Now, I'm not saying that things change. Yeah, so I'm not saying, but we have consulted previously, twice at least, and we had people who didn't want it. Now, I think you've made a very good point about the fact that clearly you're right next to these other schemes. I think, in fairness to the people on the other roads, I think probably the best way forward, and this is subject, it would be helpful if we had some input from the ward councils, because obviously they have a degree of expertise. When you say you've spoken to them, I think probably we would proceed with the proposals that we have for Whitethorn and Providence, and look in short order to move ahead with a consultation in Edgar Road. But I would say that it's very important that when we do that consultation for your neighbours, if they really are passionate and they want this, they must reply to that consultation, because the situation with petitions are a very good starting point for these things. But I'm sure you'll appreciate if your neighbour comes and knocks on your door and says, please would you sign this petition, because you probably want to retain a good relationship with your neighbour, you may actually sign it, but may not fully be in agreement with it. I'm not saying this is your case, but you understand my point. So this is why the council, having got the benefit of the indication from residents that there is a mood swing in favour of something here, we do our own consultation. Everybody in the almost like the ballot box, in the privacy of their own homes, can say what they want, and that's where we sometimes find that the people change their views. I'm not saying that will happen in Edgar Road, but I would say that we've tried it before. So if members are agreeable, I think we certainly put it on the list, which is, I think, the recommendation here, that we actually do add it to the list and try to do it as soon as we can. I suspect that when we get, if we get, the measures in the adjacent roads in place, I suspect that the views will harden even more in favour of a scheme in your road. And so it may be that the people who are not in favour at the moment might actually say, well, on reflection, I think it would be a good idea to have the same benefits. One point, I think that Councillor Bianco, forgive me if you didn't allude to this point, but we usually remind people that there's a small point that's worth noting, that the permits for parking management schemes, there is now a charge for the first permit, whereas previously it was free of charge. It's now £75. And I'm not saying that has to be a factor, but clearly when people are weighing up in the balance whether they want something or not, it's something to be aware of. If we do a consultation, we will make that clear to everybody so they all know that. So I just think if that's helpful as a summary.
No, very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Knowles. I think the other factors that may come into this is, in due course, if Providence and Whitethorn go ahead, then the other roads within that circle will be knocking on our door too, because what we often find, almost always find, is that parking schemes creep. The first area has a problem, they come along, we give them a parking scheme. The area next to that didn't have a problem, but now that the first area's got it, they've got a problem because it moves the parking issue onto them, and so these things have a habit of creeping. So I think it makes sense to go forward. I think one point I would just emphasise is that the council's approach to these schemes is that they want to take the residents with them. They don't impose them. So as long as a majority, and this is where this comes in, as long as a majority of residents in the given spot say, yes please, we want it, then we'll implement it. But we're not going to implement something where we get a lot of residents saying, no, we don't want it. We'll look for other solutions, or we won't do it. And of course that's what's happened in the past. So we don't implement just because we think it's the right thing to do. We implement if the residents want it. So I think Mr. Knowles has made the right comment to you, which is that when we consult, as we will, I'm going to suggest that is the right way to go forward. You encourage as many of your neighbours as possible to respond, because the higher the number and the more that say, yes please, we want it, the more likelihood it is to go ahead. Because if there are, 60 houses in your street, and we only get a response from 8 of them, and 5 say yes and 3 say no, that isn't exactly convincing anybody that we should go ahead with the scheme, because 50 haven't bothered to say anything. So it's those sorts of criteria. But I do think you've made a sensible argument. It makes good sense. Was there anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to bring up the point that you said about the off-street parking, where people have been able to drop their curb. The unfortunate thing is, what's happened down Edgar Road, yes, people have dropped their curb, but they're not parking, because the gardens are so small, they've dropped their curb, they have 2 cars, they don't park on the dropped curb, they keep their parking space outside their house and then take another parking space further down the road. And that's because of the front gardens are so small. Yeah. That's what happens.
Well, it's quite clear looking at the pictures of Edgar Road, and I have been down there but not it's quite clear that some have got room to put their car on the front, whether they do it or not.
Further
and others
Yes, tends to be further down the road. Like I say, they're a different style of house.
Yes, you've got the sort of Victorian
The Edwardian cottage terraces.
and then you've got,
Yeah.
and then you've got the 1930s.
Yeah, yeah,
The semis that have got the
yeah.
and the others that have.
And some of the terraces, the Edwardian ones, like the house that I live in, they do, and they manage to squeeze a car on.
Yeah,
You'll be surprised.
That's what the new
But there's
change to our policy.
yeah.
That's what the change to our policy
Yeah.
has produced.
But the unfortunate thing is, there's some of the houses that don't, and that's pretty frustrating that they've got their own spot, and then they choose to park their car outside your house, and you think, well, you've got the drop curb, why can't you park your car on your
what
drop?
would happen with a parking management scheme, of course, is that outside, if one is implemented in this street, there obviously wouldn't be what do you call them?
Bay.
A bay, thank you. Where a drop curb is, a bay will only go against a normal piece of pavement. But there will be a yellow line that runs across a drop curb. So that will prevent people with a drop curb parking on the street by their drop curb, or at least it will prevent it during the hours of operation of the scheme. Am I not right?
No, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Just going to add a point, and it's just occurred to me, because you made a good point there. One of the things that we will look at, sometimes we find in a road there are roads of more than one character. So, what I say is that parts of it are one type, another part another type. Now, like this one. So what you do sometimes find is that the people who have the benefit of the drop curbs and the plenty of parking space, well, I don't want a parking management scheme because what benefit is that to me? I'm happy. I'm exactly as I am. Whereas, of course, the neighbours up the road who have the Victorian cottages with no parking space outside, well, it's all very well for you, but I don't have the benefit of that. That's the sort of thing we can have an intelligent discussion with the ward councillors about, because it's not unknown for us when we do a consultation to find that there are different responses in one part of the road to another. It is possible to then make a recommendation that we actually do half a scheme or something like that. But until we've actually had that feedback from people and had that discussion preferably with the ward councillors, then we can't have the benefit of that wisdom. But it's a good point you make. Thank you for making it. And you know, as the pictures show, there are differences in different parts of Edgar Road. But let's take that on board as we take this process forward, if that's okay.
Anything else? In that case, I'll move the recommendations. 1, 2, and 3. Does that cover off what we need to do here? It does.
Yeah.
Which is that I'll meet with the petitioners. I've listened to you. I've noted the result of the previous consultations, and I've instructed officers to add this request to the council's parking management programme for further investigation and inclusion. All right. So hopefully we will move this forward. We'll certainly have a discussion with your local ward councillors, and we'll certainly look at the street in the terms that Mr. Knowles has just mentioned, to come up with as practical a solution as we can. Bearing in mind the two roads either side are going to be almost certainly go ahead, then there is sense in doing something that would help the street itself. I'll save my warning. I've saved my warning to the end, which is that the funding for these schemes comes from the government via the Mayor of London, and he is not always as competent with his finances as he might be, and therefore does not always hand down the money quite as quickly as he should do to finance these schemes. But that aside, I'm sure we can move it forward. So we will do our best, and Mr. Knowles will be in touch with you to keep you in the loop. I hope so. We're fighting against you, Les, if that's what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that closes the meeting.